Hello and welcome to Microeconomics. Today we truly begin our study of microeconomics. For those of you who've already had macro, you probably have been doing a review up to this point because we had to get out of the way some of the general terminology, some of the ideas that are common to both macroeconomics and microeconomics. What we begin today is the study of strictly microeconomics. And we begin in doing so by delving a little bit more deeply into, at least initially, the demand curve. I want to pose for you an interesting dilemma you might have. If you're a business person and you're thinking of raising the price on your good, then you suddenly come to realize that there are going to be two opposing forces as the result of that change. On one hand, you're going to receive more money per unit because you've raised the price. But on the other hand, you're going to lose some sales. You're not going to sell as many units. So an interesting question is, which of these two opposing forces are going to win? It's kind of a push and pull. On one hand, we're pushing our sales or revenue, total revenue figure up by increasing the price. On the other hand, we're pulling it back down by losing some sales. Because remember, we discovered that buyers are discouraged by higher prices. So a kind of an interesting question for you is which of these two forces are going to win? And the answer to that question is what economists refer to as elasticity. And that's our topic for today and next session. So we're going to begin by talking about what exactly is elasticity and what are we trying to measure with it. So you see here a definition for elasticity. The terminology sometimes bothers people a little bit. If it does, then a good way of thinking of it is responsiveness. We're really trying to establish how responsive are our consumers to a change in price. And we're trying to determine, will their percentage change in quantity demanded be greater than our percentage change in price? It's important to recognize that we're not talking about an absolute amount, we're talking about a percentage change. Because if we say we're going to raise the price of something by $1, we don't know whether that's a lot or a little bit. It depends on what the product is. If the product is something that costs thousands of dollars, raising it by $1 doesn't really have a big impact. On the other hand, if it's something that costs 50 cents, raising it by $1 is a huge deal. Now, the calculation for this then is percentage change in quantity divided by percentage change in price. The delta here is just change, so we do the change in quantity divided by the average quantity, that's the numerator. Then we divide that by the denominator, which is the change in price divided by the average price. Now bear in mind, one or the other of these two pieces is going to have to be negative. Either the quantity is going to be negative, in which case we raised price, and the numerator is positive, or else the price change is going to be negative, which means we lowered the price, and the numerator is going to be positive. One or the other of the two of them are going to have to be a negative amount, and the reason being because of the law of demand. So typically, we simply ignore the negative sign. What we're interested in is what's the absolute value of this, how large is this? We're interested in the push and the pull, where the push is the price and the push is the quantity. So if we're looking at changing our price for tacos and we're trying to decide, should we lower them from $1.10 to 90 cents? The question in our mind is, are we going to pick up enough demand to make it worth our while? Now we know that by lowering it from 110 to 90 that we're going to pick up more sales, but are we going to pick up enough to make it worth our while? We categorize the number we find into one of three categories. If the elasticity number, that is the absolute value, is between 0 and 1, we say it's inelastic, which means it's unresponsive. That is, the quantity demanded, the percentage change in quantity demanded is smaller than the percentage change in price. In that case, we raised the price, and the result was our consumers didn't react as strongly as we reacted in terms of the price. The other possibility, or another possibility, is that they are responsive. That is, they change their percentage of quantity more than we change our percentage change of price. So in that case, the percentage change of quantity is greater than the percentage change of price. In other words, the numerator is larger than the denominator, which gives us a value greater than 1 and means they're responsive. We raised price a little bit, they changed their quantity a lot. The other possibility, the final possibility, is that it makes no difference at all, that they exactly offset our change. That is, we change price by a percentage and they change their quantity by an exact matching percentage. In that case, the elasticity of demand will be equal to 1, and it's said to be unit elastic. Now, from our standpoint as business people, probably the more interesting thing for us is what's known as the total revenue test. And that's really what I alluded to begin with. That is, what we're interested in finding out is, as we change price, is our sales, and economists refer to sales as total revenue, is our sales going to go up or down? Is our sales figure going to go up or down? Remember that the sales figure is the price that they pay times the quantity that they purchased. So total revenue is equal to price times quantity. As price decreases, suppose we give a price reduction, if demand is elastic, then total revenue increases. If demand is inelastic, then total revenue decreases. And if demand is unit, then total revenue stays constant. So if they are responsive and we give them a price cut, then they will reward us by giving us increased sales. In other words, their percentage change in quantity will be greater than our percentage change in price. If, on the other hand, they're not very responsive or very elastic, then we give them a price cut, and guess what? We actually lose sales as a result. And if we change price and nothing changes, then we say that it's unit elastic. Along a linear demand curve, and that's the sort that we have been looking at, there actually are 3 different areas. There's one point that's unit elastic, and then on one side it's elastic, and on the other side it's inelastic. And let me show you what I mean by that. Here we have a linear demand curve. There is a single point at a price of $50 per unit. At that price, changes in prices don't seem to have any effect. At prices above that, the impact of the curve is elastic or responsive, and so changes in prices, an increase in price actually causes an increase in total revenue. At points beyond that, they're inelastic or unresponsive, and so changes in total revenue, changes in prices, reductions in prices actually decrease our total revenue. Now, before you jump to a conclusion, I want to make sure that you understand that we are not total revenue maximizers. This point is not necessarily the point that we want to operate as a business. It is simply the total revenue maximization. That's a mistake that a lot of business people make. They try to maximize their sales. Maximizing your sales may not necessarily give you any profits at all, because we don't know anything about cost yet. That's yet to come. But we do know that you reach the total amount of revenue at the unit elastic point. Now, there are some cases in which the elasticity is actually constant. I always think of these as very special cases. They're cases that are unusual, and they in two cases they do occur, but one case almost never occurs, but they're fairly unusual. One case is a perfectly elastic demand curve. And in a perfectly elastic demand curve, consumers will not tolerate any price increases at all. Elasticity here is infinite. Any change in price yields a 0 in the numerator, and so when you divide it out, you end up with infinity. And so they're absolutely responsive. They're perfectly responsive to any changes in prices. The other possibility is a perfectly inelastic demand curve. Here we simply have a vertical line, and here price doesn't seem to affect anything. And the other possibility of a constant elasticity is the unit elastic curve, in which the consumer simply adjusts their quantity to whatever happens in terms of price. Let's look at the first two first. In this case, this one's going to turn out to be, the perfectly elastic case is going to turn out to be a very important one as we go through the course. This is a case in which the producer has absolutely no control whatsoever over the price. They must sell this product at the price P here, otherwise they sell none. And so as a result, they are completely dependent on the market as to what they sell their price for. They're price takers. The second panel, the perfectly inelastic, does occur. This occurs in the case of the best example I can think of is in the case of insulin. In the case of insulin, it really doesn't matter what the price is. You only want that amount. You don't need any more. You don't need any less. It doesn't matter what the price is, because essentially you've got to have it. And the same thing would be true for any other, any sort of medication that you had to have in order to survive. And in that case, it's a little much to say price doesn't matter. Price does matter. It does matter to you how much it costs. Nevertheless, whatever the price is, you're going to take it for whatever that price is. In that case, the consumer is completely and totally dependent on the supplier. In the first case, the supplier was completely and totally dependent on the market to set the price for them. In the second case, in the case where you're completely inelastic, you're perfectly inelastic in demand, you're completely and totally dependent on the supplier, because you've got to have whatever it is that we're talking about. In the final case, in the unit elastic case, you simply have a budget of X amount, and so you continue to change the quantity in order to reach the combination that you've decided is important for you. And so if you've decided, well, I'm only going to spend $20 a week on gasoline, if the price goes up, you get less gas. If the price goes down, you get more gas. And so as a result, you adjust your quantity to match any changes in prices. So, summary here of price elasticity of demand. We are talking about demand. What would happen if we had a 10% increase in price? If it's perfectly inelastic, there would be no change in quantity demanded. The total revenue for the supplier would go up by 10%, because essentially they get all of the change because the quantity doesn't change. In the inelastic portion, which means that the elasticity coefficient is less than 1, we would have a drop by less than 10% as a result of a 10% increase in price, and we would have an increase by less than 10% in total revenue. In the case of unit elastic, and again, if the word elastic is a stumbling block, think in terms of responsiveness. In the case of an unresponsive, we have an increase in price of 10%, but the total revenue increases by less than 10%. In the case of unit elastic, we change price by 10%. The quantity demanded drops by 10%, and the total revenue does not change at all. In the case of elastic or responsive behavior, we have a drop of an increase in price of 10%. The drop is more than 10%. That is, they overreact from your standpoint, and the result is you actually have a decrease in total revenue. And in the case of perfectly elastic, we increase the price by 10%. We have no sales, quantity drops to zero, and thus total revenue drops to zero as well. So what causes this to happen? What causes us to be more responsive for some products and less responsive to other products? Well, there are three major things that will increase our responsiveness. The greater the availability of substitutes and the more similar those substitutes are, the more responsive we are. So to the extent that a product is very exclusive, that it's the only one, then our response will be more muted. But to the extent that there are a lot of choices, a lot of other things, then our response will be more so. This is why increase in price of gasoline bothers you, but increase in price of Cokes is an aggravation, but doesn't seem to be a major thing, because you have less substitutes for gasoline than you do for Cokes. If you increase the price of Cokes, then you just buy Pepsis instead, or vitamin water, or something else. On the other hand, if there's an increase in the price of gasoline, you feel like you don't have any choice about that. Second, the larger the share of the consumer's budget, the more important the good is, the greater is your responsiveness. So the bigger the piece of your consumer budget that it is, the more you're going to react. And finally, the last one is the longer the period of adjustment. The longer you have to adjust to it, the more you can adjust to it and find an available substitute. Going back to the gasoline example a second ago, in the short run, you may not have a substitute for gasoline, but if it goes high enough and you have a long enough period, then you can move closer to whatever you need to get to, work, school, or whatever. And so as a result, you can do more to adjust to the change in price. And this, of course, is always the case on both sides of the market. So as we go through time, demand gets more elastic, more responsive through time. You see this as moving from demand for 1 week, demand for a month, demand for a year. And you can see that as we have more and more time to adjust to it, we have more and more time to find substitutes, and we have more and more time to find other ways of satisfying it or other ways of changing our budget to accommodate it. So one of the things that we note is if we do both short run and long run adjustments, both short run and long run estimates of elasticity, we see a difference between the two of them. And here's a set. A number of economists actually try to calculate how responsive we are to particular categories of goods and services. And you'll see that as time goes on, we do have much larger ability to adjust to them as we have more and more time. A great example here is air travel. In the short run, if you've got to get there right now, you really don't have an awful lot of ability to change the price, to adjust to the price. On the other hand, if you have a little longer period of time, then you can adjust to that. And so you see that in the short run, the elasticity coefficient is inelastic, but over the long run, the elasticity coefficient is elastic. Which explains why they price the way they do. They price higher for immediate travel, but you can get some bargains if you're willing to go a little bit longer or wait a little bit longer or be a little bit more flexible. Now we can do the exact same thing for supply, and we can define a responsiveness on the part of the producer. This is, how does the producer respond to any change in price? It's exactly the same calculation. It's the percentage change in quantity supplied divided by the percentage change in price. In terms of actually calculating it, we do it exactly the same way. We find the difference in quantity and divide it by the average quantity, and that's the numerator. Then in the denominator, it's the difference in price divided by the average of price. Since we have the law of supply, both of these will move in the same direction. So this one by its very nature is going to be positive. The actual coefficient will be positive because either we'll have two negatives or two positives, and the result is we'll end up with a positive figure. Once again, we're not really interested in what the sign of of the coefficient is. It's always going to be positive. We're interested in the magnitude of it. And one of the things that we observe is that if price increases, the quantity supplied also increases, and they're going to move in the same direction, so we're always going to end up with a positive number. And the question is, which one of them wins? Does price win or does quantity supplied win? Again, same sort of terminology. If it's greater than 1, if it's less than 1, it's inelastic. If it's greater than 1, it's elastic. And if it's exactly equal to 1, then it's said to be unit elastic. Exact same as what we had before. Less than 1 means the quantity change is smaller than the price change. Greater than 1 means the quantity change is greater than the price change. And if the two are equal, then of course it's unit. Here too, we still have constant supply curves, constant elasticity supply curves, similar to last time. So we have perfectly elastic ones, and it's going to turn out that there's an entire category of industry which is perfectly elastic, and we'll come back to that one again. We have perfectly inelastic, exactly as before. Perfectly inelastic in this case might be an occasion in which the particular item being supplied is limited in quantity. So as an example, if there is only one person who can do this particular thing, then the supply curve is perfectly inelastic. There's only one Elvis Presley, so the supply curve for Elvis Presley is at the quantity of 1. It doesn't matter what you pay Elvis Presley, you're only going to get 1. And so the higher the demand is, the higher the price is going to be. On unit elastic, we exactly offset price changes with quantity changes. Now here, once again, we might consider what would cause supply elasticities to change. And essentially, there are two things. The first is, as marginal cost rises, so rises the elasticity or responsiveness. So if marginal cost, the additional cost for producing this good or service, rises quickly, then this will be very responsive. If it rises slowly, then it'll be very unresponsive. And the other one is exactly what we saw before, and that is the period of adjustment. The longer we have to adjust to it, the more likely that our response will be more elastic. So we see here that same sort of thing that we had before, 1 week price increase, a 1 month price increase, and a 1 year price increase. And you can see that as we have more and more alternatives, more and more choices, then the quantities get larger and larger, which means the elasticity is going to get larger and larger as well. We want to stop there for this time, and we'll come back to elasticity next time. Next time we'll talk a little bit about some elasticities other than the one that we talked about this time. The other elasticities are how responsive we are to something other than price. We wanted to do these two because both demand and supply have price in common, and so as a result we're in a position to kind of compare notes between the two sides of the market. There are some others which are very useful to us and help us to understand our consumers a little bit better as producers or the other side of the market, the firm producing the good or service. So we'll stop there this time, and we'll see you next time.